is the gap that we're trying to close. We're proposing a new API that would give developers a more accurate and customizable view of animation smoothness. And originally, our original thought was to reflect both the main and the compositor thread activity. And since then, we've gotten some feedback that maybe the main thread only might be sufficient. So this is something we're still discussing. We want the API to be lightweight and performant, not causing any regressions, and would allow developers to define their own measurement windows. We're not aiming to improve the animation, just measuring, and we're looking at the entire browser Windows content. So we've identified 5 main use cases. First would be on-demand actions like scrolling or dragging, where animations begin on a user's click. And that kind of average metric or continuous metric isn't necessarily needed for this, since there is no animation without the click. We've also looked into browser benchmarking, such as motion mark, which currently the way they measure is based off of RAF calls. We've talked to a gaming team as well, where smoothness directly impacts gameplay and character movement and decision-making as a player, as a user. So we're looking into that as well. Of course, testing on different devices will uncover, different combinations of browsers and hardware. It will show issues in performance that we didn't know about. And lastly, improving animation libraries, which many currently rely on custom logic or manual frames per second tracking. We've reviewed multiple existing approaches, which each come with their own set of strengths, of course, and limitations. So request animation frame was the first one that we looked into. It's easy to use, but it can be energy intensive and not always the most accurate depiction of perceived smoothness. We also looked into long animation frames, which flags slow frames but lacks the specifics. It'll tell you about the long frames, but you might not be getting the whole picture here. For request video frame callback, it's video specific and can be inconsistent across browsers. So, lastly, in the past, Edge had an FPS emitter library that kind of worked similarly to request animation frame. It kind of builds off of that described above, and it also had similar limitations, the request animation frame. Right now, we're exploring at least 4 potential API designs. I want to highlight super explicitly that there's no proposed design yet or no front runner. So we're really open and trying to get as much input as we possibly can. We've looked at a couple different options, and then we've also received some great feedback from reviewers so far. So they've suggested things. So truly an open space. For our first option, and they're not in any order of importance. This directory would call an API like performance.frameinfo to get frame data. And we call that API to measure some frame information at a specific point in time. And we would call this multiple times to calculate the average frame rate. Option 2 uses start and end markers to measure frame rate over some kind of custom interval. And when the duration of a frame is too long, we would know that there's some kind of rendering issue. This is similar to the abandoned frame timing API, which creates and stores a performance frame timing object for each open web page, which then developers can look at. Our third option, event listener, triggers events when frames per second or our measurement drops below a certain threshold. However, we've talked about how this approach might not give us the most detail. So I would say if there's one that we're looking at the least, it's probably this one. And then lastly, for our fourth proposed option, the performance observer. This one's similar to long animation frames and the paint timing API, using a performance observer pattern that lets developers monitor specific performance events. So while long animation frames provides specific metrics about long frames, event listeners can be a more general way to detect frame rate drops and trigger alerts when performance dips. There are still a lot of open questions that we'd love input on, so feel free to take a look at those, and I'll put the link to this explainer in the chat. We also have an issue on GitHub open for this as well, which I can share, where we have people giving feedback as well. So some kind of next steps and what we're asking for from you all is we're actively seeking feedback just from the developer community, and we've received some extremely helpful feedback already. And I want to highlight that there's no finalized API yet. This explainer is in the discussion stage. It's very early and a starting point for collaboration. We also have 2 engineers from our team on the call as well, Olga and Rahul. And our goal in the next few months is to choose the shape and design of the API. I'll pause there and stop presenting for now, but I'll put the link in the chat and hopefully everyone can take a look, and then I'll pass it over to Olga and Rahul if there's anything else that they want to share. But that is the explainer as of now.
Just a quick additional note. Thanks, Anna, for sharing. And as she mentioned, I think we've gotten like really good feedback. I think Michael's been really helpful in reviewing the proposed the API shape and what we're trying to do. Just the only ask is like if anyone has any prototypes or any past like attempts to kind of solve this problem, like we'd be able to take a look at that. We're still like in this place where we're trying to experiment and trying different things. So any sort of information or like threads here could be super helpful. Thanks.
Cool. And with that, I'll stop the recording and we can start the discussion.